who is the Community Assistance Team Specialist for Region 6 for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So we are really excited to have both of them here to share some opportunities to help close the funding gaps that are sometimes present when you tackle a preservation or rehab project. So Shohan, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Valerie. Hi, everybody. My name is Shohan. I'm the Historic Properties Coordinator of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network, funding opportunity preservation. So I will start with the intervention loan. Our intervention loan program provides low interest loans for repairs to historic buildings. And the goal of this program is to stabilize historic property, support comprehensive efforts to rehab the building, and to loan and leverage matching funds to make the project viable. The property, in order to be eligible for the program, will need to be 50 years and older and located in Michigan. We do not require the property to be listed on the National Register, but being on the National Register will get extra points during the evaluation process. And we will accept applications from those applicants, nonprofits, municipalities, DDAs, land banks, religious organizations, CDCs. So the applicant can own the property to apply, or if they don't own the property, they just need the property just need to be within the applicant's mission. They can also apply for it. And here are some examples of eligible activities. They will include like plumbing, roofing, foundation work, HVAC, electrical system, and the mothballing will also be considered. This loan we provide from between $1,000 up to $15,000, and to apply there's a $100 application fee. Here's our selection criteria, the historic significance. So being on the National Register will get extra points for that. And the long-term plan, the financial viability of the project, the applicant, and the location. And this is the reviewing process. When we receive an application, we will review and make a decision within 30 days. And if the project is approved, we will issue an award letter to the applicant. And then the applicant will need to submit the work plan to Mhpn. We will review the work plan and the contractor's qualifications. And if we approve that, then the work can start. And after the work is completed, Mhpn will review the completed work again to make sure everything has been done correctly. And if everything has been accepted, then we will make the check payable to the contractor. Then the repayment will begin. Here's one intervention loan we closed last year. The applicant is a Calhoun County Land Bank Authority, and this is for the 26 Fremont Street in Battle Creek. They used our $15,000 intervention loan in combination with a grant they received from the Battle Creek Community Foundation for the roof replacement. So here's some before and after photos. And next, I would like to introduce our pre-development loan program. And the purpose of this program is to cover reasonable third-party costs that occur in the early stages of the development and are necessary in making the project happen. The property eligibilities are the same as intervention loan, 50 years and older and located in Michigan. And for this loan program, we will accept applications from both nonprofits and for-profits. I will give some examples of eligible activities like accounting, architectural and engineering, development consultants, environmental assessment, historic consultant, legal fees, licenses and permits, market and feasibility studies, marketing, survey, title clearance, zoning approvals, and we will also consider acquisition. And for this loan, we will approve up to $50,000. And this loan's interest rate is 5%. The term will be 24 months or the closing of construction financing, whichever is earlier. And unlike the intervention loan, so the intervention loan is an amortizing loan, and the pre-development loan, during the term of the loan, it will be quarterly interest-only payments, and then the principal will be due at the end of this term. And for the pre-development loan, the application fee is $250. And this is our selection criteria for this loan program. So there's the quality of the application, the financial viability, and the applicant's experience and qualifications, and timeline of the project, benefit to the community, the applicant's financial contribution to the project themselves. And for this loan, we do require a guarantor as a secondary loan repayment source. And for the pre-development loan, when we receive an application, we will make a decision within 60 days. And if the project got approved for the loan amount they applied for, then we will close with the applicant. We will sign the agreement, and then the applicant can submit like their invoice and receipts for disbursement. And here are some projects that received our loans. The upper left one is the Casa del Rey Apartments in Pontiac. And the upper middle one is 1108 Water Street in Bay City. And this project actually used our loan for acquisition. And on the upper right here is a Thompson Block in Ypsilanti. And the lower left corner is a Brush Park Mansion Rehab Project in Detroit. And on the last picture is the Pablo's Mexican restaurant in Reeltown, Lansing, that they're going to open this May. So if you think there's a project that may be able to use either our intervention loan or the pre-development loan, please feel free to contact us. We would love to talk to you about the project even before you submit an application, and we will definitely walk you through the whole application process. And here is my contact information on the right, my email and phone number. Please just feel free to shoot me an email, and I will be happy to work with you. And thank you very much.
All right. Does anybody have any questions specifically for Shohan before we get started? Otherwise, we're just going to transition to Chuck Donaldson's screen. So Shohan, if you want to stop sharing yours. I see a hand raised. If you could type in your question into the Q&A. Or into the chat. Oh, okay, so our application fees given back.
It's non-refundable.
All right. Thank you. There we go. All right, so now I would like to allow Chuck Donaldson to begin his presentation on behalf of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So Chuck, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Mallory. Again, this is Chuck Donaldson. I'm part of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and the Community Assistance Team. The area I cover is called Region 6, which covers the I-69 corridor and the Thumb. Thanks again for this opportunity. I was asked to kind of provide an overview of our programs with a focus on historic projects. So with that, I'll kind of get into the presentation. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the MEDC, again, we do have a number of departments, everything from like business development, including big projects like Ford and Amazon. And then we also cover things like the Pure Michigan ad campaign. The department that I'm in, and this is a little bit of an infographic, which kind of gives an overview of our department. And again, with the community assistance team, which I'm a part of, being kind of the front door to our technical assistance and incentive programs. We do have information on our website with contact information to all the various CAT team members. And then as a foundation really for our programs, we have our redevelopment ready communities, our RRC program, which really helps provide capacity to communities regarding economic development. And then Main Street is a nationally recognized program that really helps to empower communities to really think about economic development. And they also have a very strong focus on preserving historic assets. And then kind of on top of the Main Street program is a list of our main incentives, CRP being our Community Revitalization Program, TIF being Brownfield Tiff, tax increment financing, and Community Development Block Grant, federal funds from HUD. And then finally, we have a new member to our team, Redevelopment Services, where we actually have members of community development go and try to actively turn over properties, some of which are historic, helping communities and developers kind of get those projects off the ground. And so I wanted to also provide kind of a high level overview of our department's kind of mission. And over on the right side, you'll see kind of some points that really speak to what our main missions and goals are. And again, it kind of helps give people clarity on what kinds of things are in our wheelhouse. And so as I mentioned before, this is a map of our redevelopment ready communities. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this since we're really focusing on historic preservation. But please note that if you are a community, and particularly we usually work with like city managers or planning directors that is interested into the program, information is available on our website at myplace.com, MIPLACE.com, or feel free to reach out to your community assistance team member. So as I mentioned, Michigan Main Street program is, again, a nationally recognized program that really helps to empower communities and really determine how they want to see their downtown develop. And again, it does have a very strong focus on really recognizing the importance of your historic buildings, your assets, and really, redeveloping those and making those really part of your main street in your downtown. We've had a lot of success with this program. It might not be for every community. It does really require, it's a grassroots-led effort. So it does require lots of participation from volunteers and folks on the DDA and chamber and other folks. Again, as I mentioned, here's a map of our community assistance team members. Again, this is available on our website. If you are in a community, you may want to figure out which region you're in so that you can contact the appropriate person to get you to the right information. Okay, I wanted to kind of go over a little bit about our funding priorities. The way that our programs generally work is that we have competition for our funds, and so priority is placed on the projects that are, again, meeting kind of our strategic goals, but also some of these more defined community development goals. So some of these dealing with things like local and regional impact. And so a lot of times when we're looking at a project, we're trying to figure out, is this a local priority? Sometimes those visions and goals are demonstrated in the local master plan or economic development plan. Again, this helps us kind of figure out if the major priority is things like housing, hotels. We also want to, work on impactful projects or ones that are really catalytic. And so getting a good understanding about what that community need plays an important role in us incenting a project. Things like place considerations are very important. Things where we traditionally work is in what we call traditional downtown. Again, that's going to be your more urban areas or areas that have like a concentration of 20 or more commercial parcels, usually of multi-stories. And we're really looking for projects that are mixed use, ones that are also revitalizing historic structures. And if we can alleviate brownfield conditions, those are also things that come into place. Now, another important consideration of this would be also any kind of sustainable development. So we do prioritize projects that have green infrastructure or LEED certification that are using kind of like those newer technologies. And finally, economic and financial. All of our projects really have to demonstrate a financial need, and really our incentives are sized based upon the need demonstrated in the project. Also, all the costs have to be reasonable. We usually have to have estimates from contractors so that we can assure that the numbers that we're using to estimate are accurate. Okay, I wanted to probably spend more time on our specific program that we typically use for historic redevelopments. That's going to be our community revitalization program. And so this is, I think, the one that we more traditionally use, again, for redevelopment projects when we're working with historic properties. It is a gap financing program. Some of the things to note, it is competitive. We do only have a certain pot of money that is allocated by the legislature. It's got to be need-based. Again, as I mentioned, our incentives are really sized based upon the need of the project. And finally, it's performance-based. We don't give out piles of cash. The disbursement of any incentives is really itemized and identified in a term sheet. Milestones are identified. The project has to be moving forward. So this is a really great program because it does allow flexibility where we do have the option of giving grants, loans, and even equity investments. And so it is really nimble and allows us to do a lot with projects. One of the other kind of good things or really benefits of the program is that it also plays well with others. It does allow us to use this incentive along with things like Brownfield Tiff, historic tax credits, new market tax credits, low-income housing tax credits from Mhpn, and other programs. And so Again, as far as a program that has a lot of flexibility, this is a really good one. So a little bit about how the program works. And so the program, first of all, requires that the property and the specific property that we're looking at for a project meets some eligibility requirements. Generally, there has to be something wrong with it, or it's got to be historic. You can kind of see things like it being contaminated, blighted, functionally obsolete, all qualify as eligibility criteria. And for example, this is how we're able to turn things like banks into restaurants, old mills and factories into lofts and hotels and developments like that. So this is an example of one of the projects in Detroit. This was a really big one. And this one had a really complicated capital stack that included a little bit of everything, including CRP, federal and state historic tax credits, a lot of private equity, and also a lot of contributions from the city of Detroit, I think in investments and also in abatements. So again, the ability of that program to kind of be layered with other types of incentives is one of the benefits, and it is really nimble and allows us to do a lot of good things. And this is kind of a smaller project located in Owasso that also utilized some of our CRP dollars. Again, the building being historic, able to put it back into active use with new tenants. So again, ways to preserve our historic buildings in our traditional downtowns. And here's another example of the Vogue Theater in the city of Manistee, where they were able to basically preserve the theater and put it back into active use. Again, they received a CRP grant along with a Brownfield Tiff, along with private equity and local incentives. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about Brownfield Tiff. And so the Brownfield program is also a legislative program, and it's jointly administered by both DEQ and the MEDC. So generally, MEDC administers the things that are non-environmental, whereas DEQ does the administration of the environmental aspects. So you'll see, based upon the property eligibility, it's very similar to the CRP program. The CRP was modeled after Brownfield, and again, one of the main criteria is that the property where the project is being undertaken has to meet some eligibility criteria. And then for those of you who may not be familiar with how the TIF capture works, essentially what it does is it is an incentive program for developers. It allows them to basically kind of recoup some of their costs. So the way it works, and it's kind of similar to a DDA, is that in year one, you can kind of see that's before the property improvement. Basically the base value is capped. Year two on the slide, you can kind of see that it's after completion of the project. The assessed value of the property is increased. And then what happens is money spent by the developer on brownfield eligible activities, they're allowed to recoup those costs in that lighter shaded area as part of the increment financing. And so in this example, what it's intended to represent is that years 2 through 9, the developer is able to recoup his costs for environmental activities. And then year 10, the full taxes go to the local municipality. So in general, it's a really powerful tool that really kind of results in a win-win situation where the developer is allowed to kind of get assistance, financial assistance for performing those environmental activities, which a lot of time include things like demolition, lead asbestos abatement. And then the jurisdiction, the municipality, would get the full value of the incremental increase of the property after the Brownfield TIF is paid off. So one of the key things with the Brownfield Tiff program is that it must occur on eligible property, and the project and the Tiff must be approved in a brownfield plan. So this isn't something where developers can independently take on these activities. It does need to be in conjunction and coordination with the local municipality. And so this is a project that was recently completed in Owasso, where they were able to utilize both CRP and Brownfield Tiff. You can kind of see in the before picture, they had constructed, I think, a not great building in the 1960s in front of their armory building, which was at the time vacant. They were able to redevelop the property, put it back into active use, maintain a lot of the historic aspects of the property, and really increase the views of that historic property. Okay, switching gears to our other program, Community Development Block Grant. And so the Community Development Block Grant, if you're not familiar, is a federally funded program through HUD. The state does administer a Community Development Block Grant for statewide entities. So essentially HUD splits communities into entitlements and everybody else. And in Michigan, the MEDC administers the state CDBG dollars for the everybody else that's not in an entitlement community. Also just kind of mention that some of the keys with CDBG really have to do with meeting the national objective, and some of that will be reflected on some slides coming up. So as I mentioned, the CDBG program is really dependent upon things like a national objective. And so when we're talking about historic properties, things like blight for historic preservation is typically the one that we utilize a lot. However, we do sometimes use a CDBG program, let's say for other properties that, let's say are historic, but maybe not listed. We are able to do things like facade projects on those, where we're able to bring back the historic facade and historic storefronts. And so we do have also some flexibility with this program on how we use it to really bring back the historic character of properties. And so this is a project in Adrian where they were able to take an older building that was in their local historic district. It was blighted. They were able to bring it back into active use, put lofts in, and I believe some new retail on the first floor. So again, this is a great example of how we're able to take those properties that sometimes people thought were insurmountable, or the project costs weren't able to make sense. And so those really are kind of projects that are in our wheelhouse, because really for downtowns to be strong, they have to kind of put those big buildings back into active use. And so this is another kind of example where we're able to use not our blight for historic preservation, but our facade program to really bring back the historic facade of properties. Again, kind of be able to meet that goal, again, with varying funds and using the different national objectives. And then finally, we have our website with all of our resources, including information about your community assistance team member and all of our programs. And I think that's all I have for the presentation.
All right, thank you, Chuck. We did have a couple of questions come in, so I would like to ask you those. As you have questions, now is the time to ask them. We'll spend the rest of the time going over those questions, so we might end a little bit early. So there was a question, what is the average funding distributed through the CRP per project and yearly? Do you have some stats on that?
Yes. So we get an annual allocation from the legislature. Trying to think of that number. Well, I guess the question sounds like it's really more per project, and I'd say per project it ranges. So we're able to do CRP projects probably as small as 200,000, and I think one of the largest grants that I've heard of was close to 10 million. So it's got a pretty wide variety of uses, but it really has to be based upon the size of the project and kind of what the project is doing. And again, sometimes on other projects, we're able to also layer incentives like CRP and Brownfield Tiff to be able to make a project work. And then we do get a yearly allocation. I do think it might be around 30 million, but don't quote me on that. And we typically don't run out of funds. There's also not necessarily like an application period. So we do take projects really on a rolling basis.
Sure. Are the CRP loans forgivable over time, and what is the interest rate?
Great question. And so what we typically do with the CRP program, when we're talking about loans, we try to do equity participations where we partner with a local bank. If one can't be found, then I believe we'll do our own loan. That's kind of a last resort. We typically will use, I'd say, a little bit better than what you would find at a bank. But it's really based upon, I'd say, the deal, the investment, and it's really all that is figured out by our underwriters who essentially underwrite the project like a bank would.
Okay, so there's some variables to the interest rate.
Definitely, but it's typically, I'd say, close to what you'd find in either a little bit less than what you'd find in traditional financing.
Someone asked if the slideshows will be sent to participants. We are recording this webinar at this time, and so we will be posting a link to view the recording on our social media sites. I am unsure if the presentations will be shared at this time. Usually we're just sharing the recording. So we currently don't have any open questions. So if anybody has questions for Chuck or for Shohan, now is the opportunity to kind of get those questions answered. Maybe while we're waiting to see if there's any more questions, Chuck, could you describe, so you mentioned that you serve a specific region. What should people do when reaching out to MEDC? Are there certain point people? Should they be looking for which region they are in, or how would you recommend that?
Yep, great question. And so on our website, mhplace.org, there is information for your community assistance team member where there'll be a map and then contact information for that individual.
Okay, excellent. We did have another question come in. Do Michigan Main Streets have an advantage for funding through MEDC?
Generally, yes. So when we're looking at the prioritization of a project and how it competes, things like Main Street and RRC engagement are definitely considered as part of our funding.
Okay. And now for the funding, it's kind of rolling applications, or do you guys have like dates that you like to have things by? How does that process work?
For all the programs I discussed today, there's really rolling applications. We have in the past had rounds for things like CDBG, but they're not really necessarily for like historic preservation projects. They're typically more for infrastructure. So generally, if you have a project or an interest, my recommendation would be to contact your community assistance team member to kind of flesh out your project and see if you'd be eligible.
And now I know you mentioned for the CRP that kind of the lower end is 200,000. How are you able to assist maybe smaller projects, or what is kind of like the minimum threshold of scopes that you would recommend reaching out to MEDC?
Yeah, so generally the type of projects that we do, as I mentioned kind of earlier, really have to kind of pass that catalytic test. So typically we don't do things that are more deferred maintenance, but the rehab of a building is a little bit more in our wheelhouse. And so really that's going to depend upon, I'd say, the scope of your project. And so I know that we're working on some active projects right now that, let's say, are doing facade projects that are, I think they're in the range of like $40,000 per property, but there's multiple, like there's 3 or 4 properties. I think the largest one in that group ranges up to, I think, 200,000. So it really depends, but typically we don't do well with things like deferred maintenance. It really has to be like the redevelopment and reactivation of a property, which generally makes it of, more than $100,000 project.
Okay. Excuse me, Shohan, I do have a question that came in for you. Is membership in Mhpn necessary for application to the various loan programs you discussed?
No, it's not necessary.
Okay. All right. So there was another question about, will the slides be provided? We will be providing a link to a recording of this webinar. The slides will not be provided, but you can look through and listen to the webinar again at your leisure, or share with other individuals who are unable to participate. Shohan or Chuck, do you guys have any parting thoughts that you would like to share before we wrap up? We currently don't have any open questions, so we'll keep this brief.
Yeah, I'll just add that, again, a lot of our information is available on our website, including contact information with folks to reach out to. So if you are interested in the program, any programs, or you're not really sure if you have a project, please feel free to reach out.
And I just would like to note that if you have any questions or think a project might be able to use our program, just feel free to send us email or call us. I think that works the best.
Excellent. And we did have two questions come in, so we'll pause for that. And they are for Shohan regarding the Mhpn loans. So for the pre-development loan, can the project grantor be a community foundation, or who typically holds that role?
So typically it can be organization, individual, or yeah, so anybody really, but we just need to evaluate if they or this person have the financial strength to, to be the guarantor.
Okay. So a community foundation, it sounds like, could hold that position.
Yeah, as long as they have the financial strength.
Perfect. And what was the time review for the loan intervention?
The intervention loan, we will make a decision within 30 days upon the receipt of the completed application.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today and for your time. Again, we will be hosting more webinars in the future. We're still solidifying our schedule. So I do hope that you will join us again, and look for this, the link to the recording on our social media pages. That's where we are currently housing the recording of our webinars. Additionally, when the webinar ends, there will be a link to a survey. Please take a few moments to complete the survey. It's very brief, and we're really seeking feedback so we can continue to improve this, this offering to the public and to you, so that we can add more value to the information that is being provided to the people involved in preservation. So again, thank you so much. Please take a moment to complete that survey, and do look for our recording on our social media sites. Thank you so much, Shohan and Chuck, for your time today. It is greatly appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you guys at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks.